sort of decades later. But that was the whole thing that inspired Paul McCartney for the Magical Mystery Tour.
We're going to take a quick break, folks. When we return, we've got more with Mr. Derek Shelmerdine and psychedelic music right after this. Don't go anywhere now.
John will be right back right after this.
Yes, he will. Check out the new book from Derek Shelmerdine,
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
It tells the story of rock and roll from its roots right up until the mid-'70s punk.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Not just the music, but also the events that shaped the music.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
It includes the backgrounds to recording sessions, singles, album releases, births and deaths, epic concerts, and festivals.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Shelmerdine has made a painstaking effort to document pretty much every event that would prove significant in shaping popular music.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Purchase the book at www.rockandrollunraveled.com. Follow him at Twitter at R&R Unraveled, and look him up on Facebook at Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
By author Derek Shelmerdine.
Available now.
I think of myself more as a song and dance man, you know.
The only reason that we are still together is that the subtlety of delicate change in the music.
Some of it's old, some of it's new, something borrowed, something brown.
It's the sea of a band that wears makeup. And you've got snakes, and you've got guillotines, and you've got really hard rock, Detroit rock and roll.
All those groups and people that started off when we were starting off are all still going.
It's funny how many times rock and roll's been dead. Yeah, how many times people have said it's been dead, it just keeps coming back like a bloody phoenix. Rock and roll!
I mean, Allen Ginsberg's popped up a few times. I mean, he famously did the first reading of Howl, his poem, in October 1955, and that was actually sued. The publishers were sued for obscenity in 57. But when the judge came to sort of to sentence him, as it were, the publisher, he very much took the side of the author and the publisher. And it was a guy called Judge Clayton Horn, and he quoted the motto of the English Order of the Garter, which is "Evil to him who evil thinks." And I thought that was great. You know, this is a good book. It's you that's got the bad mind.
And what did the publisher think was so obscene? Because they were suing him over it. So
I can't remember exactly what the bits were, but I mean I've read the poem. It's very much about drugs and desolation. And there are probably some references in there that people would take umbrage to.
Can you imagine the publishers and the people of that day jumping forward to today and seeing this? Because whatever was obscene back then is like normalized today. These people wouldn't know what to do.
Absolutely. And I think it's one of those things that really shows the difference between then and now.
Lady Gaga would freak them out.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Quite rightly, too. But, one of these big, in the UK, coming together of beatniks and hippies was at the Albert Hall in a thing called the International Poetry Incarnation in 1965. And that was one of the first real British happenings. But if you like, the sort of psychedelic music we all know and love, that's really starting to come together in the middle of 1965. The Charlatans, who were very much, they were a San Francisco band, but they got the first residency at the Red Dog Saloon in Virginia City, Nevada, and they became the first house band. A guy called Dan Hicks, who's, not quite still around, but up until very recently, and his band, the Hot Licks, he was very much part of the early Charlatans. And the Red Dog Saloon itself was reckoned to be the first psychedelic dance hall. If it wasn't actually the first, it certainly was one of the earliest. And Big Brother and the Holding Company became the house band when the Charlatans moved on in 1966. And the thing about Red Dog, you can't really say it's on tour, but you can actually go there if you happen to be in Virginia City. They have an open mic there on a Wednesday, start at 7:30 according to their website, and they have live bands at the weekend, so you can actually become part of the psychedelic experience.
And that's what they do. They still continue the psychedelic experience there.
Yeah, I mean, they promote themselves very much. They promote their history very much. But nowadays, I mean, there'd be a whole host of different kinds of music playing there. But it's great to see that, you know, the Red Dog Saloon, something that was around in the mid-'60s and a major player as a venue in the story, is still going strong. I think that's great. So many venues from that era sadly no longer with us.
Now we got some early UK singles coming up, right?
Yeah, some great early British singles popping up. I mean, the Kinks, again, Summer 65, See My Friends, very much uses a sort of Indian raga sound, and that's part of the beginning of all this. Dave Davis is on tour. He's in America, 9th to the 21st of April. And the Cast-Off Kinks, which you couldn't really call them a tribute band because most of the people in it have been in the Kinks at one point or another. They're touring the UK from the 8th of November to the 7th of December.
Oh, that's great.
And the Yardbirds.
That's in the UK, right? They're in the UK for that.
Yeah, the Cast-Off Kinks are just in the UK, and Dave Davis is just in America. And they're relatively short tours as well. I mean, Dave Davis is 9th to the 21st of April next year, and the Cast-Off Kinks is the 8th of November to the 7th of December. What I've noticed is an awful lot of the people we talk about are only on the road for quite a short time. I think it's because it's coming up to December. A lot of people like to finish their tours before Christmas.
That's because they have arthritis and stuff, and it'd be hard to tour in the winter time.
Absolutely.
I mean, none of these people we're talking about are young chickens anymore.
Yeah. Well, cannabis is supposed to be very good for arthritis, keep it in the context, as it were. But the Yardbirds, I mean, I've seen it referred to as the first psychedelic-sounding British pop song. They released Evil-Hearted You in the UK towards the end of 65. But the whole acid thing really started to pick up towards the end of 65. On the 27th of November, Ken Casey and his Merry Pranksters held their first acid test event in Santa Cruz, and that's often referred to as the birth of psychedelic rock. And apparently what they had there was spiked orange juice called electric Kool-Aid.
I'll keep the joke to myself.
That's got to be a refreshing kind of drink. And the Warlocks were playing in that particular one. They were regular performers. Ken Casey ran a lot of these acid events across the next couple of years, and they were still the Warlocks when they played this first one. It was just before they changed their name to the Grateful Dead.
Now, just so people understand, this is when acid was not illegal, so they could do this.
That's right. Absolutely. Acid is LSD is still completely legal at this particular point. That's what's so strange about the story, and it's interesting when we come to the end. You can see how the illegality coincides with the end of the music era as well. But it really started. I mean, Quicksilver Messenger Service were one of the early bands. I mean, they formed in sort of late '65, and Davey Freeberg was one of the guys that put them together, the bass player. And if you go to his website, he's got something called Davey Freeberg's Quicksilver Messenger Service website. On it, he's got Happy 2018 appearances to be announced. But there's nothing announced yet, and nothing seems to have happened in 2018. So we might not get any gigs from him. Though they have been on the road, because I'm pretty sure in 2017 they were on the road.
Well, if you're in acid, time travel happens, so maybe he's got his time wrong and he hasn't jumped back to 2018 yet.
Absolutely. I mean, it would fit in nicely with time travel. I mean, who knows? There might well be time travelers amongst us.
88 miles per hour!
With Velvet Underground, most of this is happening on the West Coast, over on the East Coast. Not really considered as a psychedelic band, but if you look at they did their first gig with Nico at the beginning of '66. Now, they were part of Andy Warhol's multimedia experience. He called that the exploding plastic inevitable. Their music isn't usually considered in the sort of psychedelic frame, but if you look at the concept and the whole experience of the shows at that time, it is 100% psychedelic, because they came together in '65. The Electric Prunes sort of changed their name in early 66. They started out as the Sanctions in about a year earlier, early 65. And before becoming the Electric Plumes, they called themselves Jim and the Lords. Now, if you remember, 1965 is when the British invasion's absolutely at its peak, and American bands were giving themselves British-sounding names. The Byrds called themselves the Beefeaters before finding success as the Byrds. And they had a go at being Jim and the Lords. It didn't help them. Their first single was in May of 66, Ain't It Hard, but didn't find any success.
What were they talking about when they said Ain't It Hard?
Well, so many good thoughts could come out of that. But another band around the same sort of time, mid-66, was a band called Three Sixpence, and that's another British invasion reference, because one of the reasons that they call themselves that is, I mean, 3 and sixpence, before we decimalised, and the currency was based on, 100 pennies to £1, in the same way, 100 cents to $1. The British currency had 12 pennies to a shilling and 20 shillings to a pound. So in terms of converting money, you need to have a pretty good grasp of maths, with one base at 12 and one base at 20. So 3 and 6 would be about a sixth of a pound. So I guess that would be about 20 cents or something. It was half the price of a single at the time, I seem to remember. A single was about 6 and 4. But they released a track called Long Day's Care, and the B-side was Can't Explain, which was a cover of a love track on the Love's first album. And they actually, Three Sixpence actually morphed into Strawberry Alarm Clock. And Ed King actually joined them. Later he joined Lynyrd Skynyrd. He joined them while they were still Three Sixpence.
So it's not the song Can't Explain by The Who. It's a different Can't Explain. Okay.
That's right. That's why I just mentioned that. Because when you first look at that, you think, wow, they're covering The Who here. But when you check it out, it's actually an Arthur Lee song. And I think it's on Love's first album. But Strawberry Alarm Clock, you couldn't really say they're on tour. But they have one gig in the calendar for the 17th of November in Los Angeles at the Whiskey A Go-Go.
The famous Whiskey A Go-Go.
Oh, absolutely. So if you happen to be listening in Los Angeles or in Los Angeles on the 17th, that would be an excellent way to spend the evening, I think.
So everybody listening to us on Radio Love out there in Los Angeles, there you go. Something to do on November 17th.
Oh, something to look forward to, I would think.
I got to pump my radio stations. I can't help it, Derek.
No, it's always good to let people know when they can see things, I think. But one of the first all-out psychedelic bands, the 13th Floor Elevators, they found themselves really one of the very early, if not the first press reference to somebody being psychedelic. And they played a gig in the New Orleans Club in Austin at the beginning of '66, and the Austin Statesman reviewed it, and they had a headline that said, "Unique elevators shine with psychedelic rock." And their first album, released in the October of '66, that was called The Psychedelic Sounds of the 13th Floor Elevators. I mean, they really were going for it in a big way.
And the name itself is very unique because most buildings don't have that 13th floor.
Absolutely.
So they were hitting that psychedelic, other dimensional type thing right in their name. That's great.
Oh, absolutely. The stuff of horror movies. But in the summer of '66, we nearly found Janis Joplin as the lead singer. The band offered her the role, but she decided, because they're a Texas band, she decided she'd move to San Francisco, and that's when she joined Big Brother. There is a tour here. The guiding light in the 13th floor elevators was Rocky Erickson, a real character. We'll sort of come back to stories about him later. But he's actually on tour, again short. He's in America and pops over to Canada for a gig in early November, 2nd to the 10th of November. So, very, very shortly. And he would be well worth catching. I mean, he's one of the real guys behind the whole psychedelic thing of the 60s.
Right, you could call him one of the founding fathers of it.
Oh, I think that wouldn't be an overstatement whatsoever. I think that would be a very good description for him. And British psychedelia also starting on the horizon now in the sort of spring of 1966.